We've got kings killed in battle, one who exploded at his own funeral, a ruler executed by his own people, and yes, the promised toilet incident is coming. British history isn't a bedtime story. It's a 1,000-year saga of arrows, poison, plagues, rebellion, and really unfortunate timing. So, how did they all die? And more importantly, what did their deaths say about power? We begin in 1066, not with a battle, but with a deathbed. Edward the Confessor had ruled for over 2 decades. Known more for piety than political dominance, he spent his final months weakened, likely by a stroke or kidney failure. On January 5, 1066, he died at Westminster Palace after naming Harold Godwinson his successor. Peaceful, almost suspiciously peaceful, because his death didn't just end a reign, it created a power vacuum, and England would pay for it immediately. Harold Godwinson, crowned as Harold II, lasted 9 months. 9. In October 1066, he faced William of Normandy at the Battle of Hastings. Tradition says an arrow struck Harold in the eye before Norman swords finished the job. Whether the arrow story is fully accurate is debated. What isn't debated? He died on the battlefield, and his body was reportedly so mutilated it had to be identified by someone who knew him intimately. The Anglo-Saxon era ended in blood. Now, the Normans would rule. William the Conqueror secured his grip on England through sheer force, but his own death was almost absurdly anticlimactic. In 1087, while campaigning in France, his horse reared unexpectedly. William was thrown forward onto the saddle pommel. The impact ruptured his intestines. He lingered for weeks in agony, and then at his funeral, things somehow became worse. His body had swollen in the summer heat. When attendants tried to force him into a stone coffin that was too small, the corpse reportedly burst. The cathedral filled with such an unbearable stench that mourners fled. The man who seized a kingdom couldn't outrun nature. His son, William II of England, had a shorter and far more mysterious end. In 1100, while hunting in the New Forest, an arrow struck him in the chest. Accident? Perhaps. But the man who shot the arrow fled immediately to France, and William's brother moved very quickly to seize the treasury. No formal investigation ever happened. In medieval England, that counted as closure. Henry I of England ruled for 35 years, long by medieval standards. His downfall? Lampreys. Against medical advice, he reportedly ate too many of the eel-like fish and fell violently ill in 1135. Within days, he was dead, likely from severe food poisoning. His death triggered nearly 2 decades of civil war known as the Anarchy. Stephen, King of England, seized the throne during that chaos. His reign was consumed by civil war, rebellion, and exhaustion. By 1154, worn down by years of conflict and likely suffering from severe intestinal illness, Stephen died at Dover. His body failed after the kingdom nearly did, and from that wreckage rose a new dynasty. Henry II of England built an empire stretching from Scotland to the Pyrenees. He was brilliant, ruthless, tireless, but his sons turned against him. By 1189, sick with dysentery and emotionally shattered after discovering betrayal within his own family, Henry died in France. His final days were reportedly filled with bitterness. He ruled an empire. He could not rule his children. Richard I of England is remembered as a crusading warrior king. In reality, he spent very little time in England. In 1199, while besieging a minor castle in France, a crossbow bolt struck his shoulder. The wound itself wasn't fatal. The infection was. Gangrene set in after poor surgical removal of the arrowhead. 10 days later, Richard died of sepsis. A king who survived Crusades, undone by medieval hygiene. John, King of England, is often remembered for the Magna Carta, and for losing nearly all the territory his father had built. In 1216, while facing rebellion and invasion, John fell ill, likely dysentery. He died feverish and exhausted at Newark Castle. No glorious last stand, no battlefield heroics, just disease, which, as we'll see, might have been the deadliest enemy of medieval kings. After John's turbulent reign came his son, Henry III of England. He became king at just 9 years old and would rule for 56 years, one of the longest reigns of the medieval period. Henry was deeply religious and far more interested in building churches than fighting wars. He rebuilt Westminster Abbey in grand Gothic style, perhaps more focused on legacy than leverage. But his reign was hardly peaceful. Baronial rebellion simmered for decades, culminating in civil conflict led by Simon de Montfort. an early moment in the evolution of Parliament. By 1272, after years of political strain and advancing age, Henry died at Westminster, likely from illness such as a stroke. For once, a medieval king died in his bed, which, given the previous pattern, almost feels like a plot twist. Edward I of England, the Hammer of the Scots, spent decades at war. In 1307, marching north yet again to fight Scotland, his body finally gave out. Dysentery. Even warrior kings weren't immune to bacteria. He allegedly wished for his bones to be carried into battle after death. His son ignored that request, probably wisely. And then we arrive at one of the most infamous royal deaths in English history. Edward II of England alienated his nobles, favored controversial companions, and lost decisively at Bannockburn. Eventually, his own wife, Isabella of France, helped depose him. He was imprisoned. In 1327, he died in captivity. The traditional story claims he was murdered with a red-hot poker inserted internally, a method supposedly chosen to avoid visible marks. Modern historians debate whether this actually happened, but whether by poker, suffocation, or starvation, one thing is clear: he did not die peacefully, and the monarchy had now crossed a line. Killing your king was no longer unthinkable. It was precedent. Ironically, his son, Edward III of England, would go on to rule for 50 years. He launched the 100 Years' War and restored royal prestige. In 1377, after strokes and declining health, he died relatively peacefully, which in this era almost counts as unusual. But peace never lasts long. Richard II of England ruled increasingly autocratically. In 1399, his cousin Henry Bolingbroke overthrew him. Richard was imprisoned, and in 1400, he died in captivity, likely starved to death. His body was publicly displayed to prove it, just in case anyone had ideas. If the 14th century proved kings could be overthrown, the 15th century proved they could be replaced by their own relatives. Henry IV of England took the throne after Richard II's fall, but usurping a king comes with a cost. His reign was plagued by rebellion and instability. By the end of his life, he suffered from a severe and disfiguring illness, along with recurring strokes. In 1413, after a long physical decline, he died at Westminster, in the Jerusalem chamber. Some later connected that detail to an old prophecy that he would die in Jerusalem. Medieval England loved symbolism almost as much as it loved rebellion. His son, Henry V of England, was everything a medieval king was supposed to be: warrior, charismatic, victorious at Agincourt. But glory did not grant immunity. In 1422, while campaigning in France, he likely contracted dysentery, the same illness that had taken several kings before him. He died at just 35. England's hero didn't fall in battle. He fell to sanitation. Then came Henry VI of England, crowned as a baby, gentle, deeply pious, and catastrophically unsuited for power. He suffered prolonged episodes of mental collapse, becoming completely unresponsive for months at a time. That instability fractured the kingdom. The result? The Wars of the Roses, a dynastic bloodbath between York and Lancaster. Henry was deposed, briefly restored, then imprisoned in the Tower of London. In 1471, he died there. Contemporary accounts were vague, and later sources framed his death as the result of sorrow or melancholy. But historians have long suspected he was murdered, widely believed to have been killed on the orders of the victorious Yorkists. In this period, inconvenient kings rarely died of natural causes. Edward IV of England seized the throne during that chaos. Tall, charismatic, militarily capable. But by 1483, after years of conflict and excess, he fell suddenly ill and died at just 40. Pneumonia? Stroke? Poison? No one could prove anything. And ambiguity in this period was often deliberate. His 12-year-old son, Edward V of England, became king, briefly. Before a coronation could even take place, his uncle declared him illegitimate and confined him to the Tower of London. Edward and his younger brother were never seen alive again. Their disappearance remains one of English history's greatest mysteries. No body, no confession, just two princes who entered the tower and vanished. The uncle who benefited was Richard III of England. His reign lasted only 2 years. In 1485, at the Battle of Bosworth Field, he charged directly at his rival, Henry Tudor. It was a desperate gamble. He was unhorsed and cut down, suffering multiple head wounds. He became the last English king to die in battle. For centuries, his body lay forgotten until it was rediscovered under a parking lot in 2012. History, it seems, has a sense of irony. With Henry VII of England, the Tudor dynasty began. Unlike the chaos before him, Henry ruled cautiously. He died in 1509, likely from tuberculosis. Measured, controlled, almost uneventful. His son would be none of those things. Henry VIII transformed England forever. 6 marriages, 2 executed wives, a break with Rome, the creation of the Church of England. But by the end of his life, the powerful young athlete had become severely obese. A chronic leg wound refused to heal. Infection lingered constantly. He could barely walk and had to be moved in specially designed chairs. In 1547, he died after years of severe physical decline. Morbid obesity and chronically infected leg ulcers among the major factors. The king who reshaped religion and monarchy alike was ultimately overtaken not by rebellion, but by his own deteriorating body. His long-awaited son, Edward VI of England, became king at 9. Brilliant, devout, frail. By 15, tuberculosis was killing him. He died in 1553, sparking yet another succession crisis, because stability in England was still fragile. Mary I of England became England's first ruling queen. Determined to restore Catholicism, her reign saw the execution of nearly 300 Protestants, a campaign that earned her the enduring nickname Bloody Mary. But her personal story was far more tragic than her reputation suggests. She believed she was pregnant, twice. Both pregnancies were likely false, possibly caused by illness or hormonal complications. By 1558, she was seriously ill, and modern historians have suggested she may have suffered from ovarian or uterine cancer, though the exact cause remains uncertain. She died childless, and with her, another dynastic gamble failed. Then came Elizabeth I. 45 years of rule, naval victories, cultural flourishing, political mastery. She never married, never named a clear heir. By 1603, she was 70 and increasingly withdrawn. She reportedly refused to lie down in her final days, fearing she would not wake again. Eventually, she did not. With her death, the Tudor dynasty ended. When James I of England died in 1625, he ended the reign that had united the crowns of England and Scotland under a single monarch. James firmly believed in the divine right of kings, the idea that monarchs answered only to God, not Parliament. That belief created growing tension during his reign. By the end of his life, his health had deteriorated badly. He suffered from chronic illness, including kidney problems and what was likely the aftermath of a stroke. In his final weeks, he was weakened further by severe dysentery. He died at Theobald's house after a long decline. His death was natural. The crisis he left behind was not, because the next king would take the idea of divine authority even further. Charles I of England inherited the throne in 1625, and the tensions his father had struggled to contain. Like James, he believed kings ruled by divine right. Parliament believed otherwise. Years of disputes over taxation, religion, and authority pushed the kingdom toward conflict. In 1642, England descended into the civil war between royalists and parliamentarians. Charles eventually lost. He was captured, imprisoned, and in an unprecedented move, put on public trial. The charge was treason against his own people. Charles refused to recognize the court's authority, arguing that no subjects had the right to judge a king. The court disagreed. On the 30th of January 1649, outside the banqueting house at Whitehall, Charles I was executed by beheading. He remains the only reigning English monarch formally tried and executed by his own government. England suddenly had no king. The aftermath. After Charles I's execution, the monarchy was abolished. England became a commonwealth, later ruled by Oliver Cromwell as Lord Protector. For 11 years, the country experimented with life without a king. It didn't last. In 1660, the monarchy returned with Charles I's son. Charles II of England, son of the executed king, stepped onto the throne determined to avoid his father's fate. He ruled for 25 years, cultivating an image of charm, wit, and indulgence. His court was lively, his private life even more so. In early 1685, he suffered a sudden collapse, often described as an apoplectic fit. For 4 days, doctors subjected him to the full medical playbook of the 17th century: bloodletting, purging, and various experimental remedies. none of it helped. He died on February 6th after 4 days of intensive treatment. The exact cause is debated. And in a final twist, he was received into the Catholic Church on his deathbed, quietly. Religion, once again, lingered at the edge of royal mortality. His brother, James II of England, inherited the throne. Openly Catholic and a deeply Protestant nation, he pushed policies that alarmed Parliament and much of the country. When his Catholic son was born in 1688, fear of a permanent Catholic dynasty spread quickly, so leading figures in England invited William of Orange to invade. James ultimately fled. The so-called Glorious Revolution was relatively bloodless, at least in England, but it ended his reign. James died in exile in France in 1701, reportedly from a brain hemorrhage. No execution, no battlefield, just displacement. The crown had become conditional. Mary II of England ruled jointly with her husband William. Her reign stabilized Protestant power, but in 1694, she contracted smallpox. Despite the best medical care available at the time, the disease moved quickly. She died at 32. William was reportedly devastated. Even in an era of political maneuvering, smallpox remained indifferent to status. William III of England continued ruling alone. In 1702, his horse stumbled over a molehill, throwing him and breaking his collarbone. The injury seemed manageable. It was not. Complications followed. Pneumonia developed. He died weeks later. Jacobite supporters of the deposed Stuart line jokingly toasted the little gentleman in black velvet, the mole, as their unlikely ally. History does not always choose dignified exits. Anne, Queen of Great Britain, inherited a fragile kingdom. She endured 17 pregnancies. None of her children survived into adulthood. The physical and emotional toll was immense. By 1714, she suffered from gout, severe inflammation, and declining health. She died after a stroke at the age of 49. With her death, the Stuart dynasty ended. A new, distinctly German line would take the throne. George I of Great Britain arrived from Hanover in 1714. He spoke little English and was not particularly beloved. In 1727, while traveling back to Germany, he suffered a stroke on the journey toward Hanover. He died in Germany, away from Britain. The King of Great Britain was buried in Hanover, not Britain. The monarchy was now international, whether people liked it or not. George II of Great Britain ruled for over 3 decades. In 1760, he woke early at Kensington Palace and went to the bathroom. Moments later, attendants heard a crash. He had suffered an aortic rupture, a catastrophic internal tear, and collapsed. He died almost instantly. One of the most powerful men in Europe, undone in his private chambers. George III ruled for nearly 60 years. He lost the American colonies. He endured repeated bouts of severe mental illness. In his final years, he was blind, deaf, and largely incapacitated. He died in 1820 at Windsor Castle, aged 81. For much of his final decade, he likely did not fully comprehend the world around him. Power can isolate. Illness can erase. George IV had spent years as Prince Regent before becoming king. By the time he officially took the throne, his health was already failing, worsened by heavy drinking, overeating, and chronic illness. In 1830, he died after years of severe ill health. His coffin reportedly had to be enlarged. The age of excess had physical consequences. William IV became king unexpectedly late in life. He ruled during significant reform, including the Reform Act of 1832. By 1837, he was weakened by chronic bronchitis and heart disease. He died at Windsor Castle at 71. Unlike his predecessors, his death was relatively uncontroversial, which, historically speaking, was progress. Queen Victoria ascended the throne in 1837 at just 18 years old. She would rule for 63 years, longer than any British monarch before her. She survived assassination attempts, oversaw the expansion of the British Empire to its greatest extent, became a symbol of stability in a rapidly industrializing world. But her private life was marked by deep grief. After the death of her husband, Prince Albert, she wore black for decades. By 1901, at the age of 81, her health declined steadily. She died at Osborne House on the Isle of Wight after a cerebral hemorrhage, a type of stroke compounded by old age. An era ended with her, quite literally. Her son, Edward VII, had waited nearly 60 years to become king. His reign was short, just 9 years, but transformative in modernizing the monarchy's image. A lifelong smoker, he suffered from chronic bronchitis. In 1910, after several heart attacks, he died at Buckingham Palace. His final words were reportedly, "No, I shall not give in. I shall go on. I shall work to the end." But the body, eventually, always does. George V ruled during World War I. In 1917, amid anti-German sentiment, he changed the royal house name from Saxe-Coburg and Gotha to Windsor, a rebranding for survival. By 1936, he was gravely ill from chronic lung disease, worsened by decades of heavy smoking. In 1936, his physician later recorded administering a large dose of morphine and cocaine to hasten his death, ensuring the news would reach the morning newspapers rather than the less prestigious evening press. Even in death, image management mattered. Then came the shortest reign of the modern era. Edward VIII became king in January 1936. By December, he abdicated. His desire to marry Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee, created a constitutional crisis. The government refused to approve the marriage. So he chose love. He signed the instrument of abdication and stepped away from the throne voluntarily, the only British sovereign to do so. He signed the instrument on the 10th of December 1936, and it was given legal effect the next day by Act of Parliament. He died in 1972 in Paris from throat cancer. He lost a kingdom, but he kept his decision. His brother, George VI, never expected to be king. Reserved, burdened with a severe stammer, he became a symbol of steadiness during World War II. Years of heavy smoking led to lung cancer. In 1951, part of his lung was surgically removed. On February 6, 1952, he died in his sleep at Sandringham House, Norfolk, from a coronary thrombosis. He was 56. His death propelled his 25-year-old daughter onto the throne. Elizabeth II would go on to rule for 70 years. The longest reign in British history. She witnessed the dismantling of the British Empire, the rise of the Commonwealth, global wars, social revolutions, political scandals, and technological transformation. For many, she became synonymous with continuity itself. In September 2022, at the age of 96, she died at Balmoral Castle in Scotland. Her official cause of death was listed simply as old age. After centuries of violent ends, intrigue, and upheaval, the longest reigning monarch in British history died quietly, and the world watched. Upon her death, Charles III became king at 73, the oldest person ever to ascend the British throne. As of now, he reigns. Which means, for the first time in this video, we reach a monarch whose story is still being written, and whose ending remains unknown. When you look at all of them together, it's strange. 1,000 years of power, castles, crowns, armies, empires. And in the end, they died like everyone else. Some dramatically, some violently, some quietly in their beds. But none of them, not the conquerors, not the reformers, not the ones who ruled for 70 years, none of them kept the throne forever. So maybe the more interesting question isn't how they died. It's which of them actually mattered the most. That's what we're tackling next. The 10 greatest monarchs in British history. The ones who truly changed Britain. I'll see you in that video.